Hi everyone, welcome to Science Lab. The signs are happening because the Lord Jesus is coming. Every day we are looking some of the signs that are happening around us.
And today we are going to look at some of the end-time signs happening in Europe. Millions of Syrian refugees to hasten rise to European military. Europe's migrant crisis just got a whole lot worse.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan warned Europe on March 2, 2020 that millions of migrants would soon flood into the European Union after Turkey opened its border and gave the green light for refugees on February 28.
Erdogan said, "We don't want this money," rejecting the EU's €1 billion offer of deal with the refugees, adding to €6 billion deal in 2016. Erdogan's office, and that is it now, time for Europe to take its fair share of the burden. German Chancellor Angela Merkel responded by calling Turkey's move unexpected. Greece immediately responded by barring entrance, denying asylum, and increasing the frequency of border patrols. Greece says that about 10,000 refugees have massed at the border. However, Erdogan claims the number is actually in the hundreds of thousands. Clashes have broke out along the border between the refugees and the Greek police. Turkey accused Greece of killing 2 migrants. A Turkish official shared a video showing a boat of migrants being fired upon by the Greece Coast Guard. Greece has also used tear gas in an attempt to disperse the migrant masses along its shared border with Turkey. Turkey is already saturated with Syrian immigrants. 3.6 million Syrian refugees have made their home there since the civil war began in 2011. However, Turkey has been refusing to allow more refugees in. Instead, Turkey has deployed convoys of military equipment and thousands of troops to protect the Idlib province, the last remaining rebel stronghold and the last safe location in Syria from Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's forces. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps even more than 1 million, refugees are camped throughout the Idlib province seeking refuge, carrying signs with slogans like "From Idlib to Berlin." Close to 948,000 Syrian migrants have been displaced since December alone, when Syria renewed its offensive on the Idlib province. Assad is still working to gain control of all the Syria's territory. But he cannot do it alone. He relies on Russia for support. Russian President Vladimir Putin has backed and supported Assad's move to reconquer Syria's territory primarily by providing aerial support. The two forces have worked in tandem to restore the government's control over Syria. Since the Syrian crisis began, over 400,000 people have been killed and several million displaced. This is primarily because of how Assad and Putin have led their offensive. With backing from Russia airstrikes, Syrian artillery have bombarded towns and cities. First targeting hospitals and schools and essentially flattering the city until the majority of the inhabitants have been forced to flee. Then the Syrian army moves in and takes control. As a result, Syria has become the world's worst humanitarian crisis. According to a 2018 Pew poll, 1 million Syrian refugees have already migrated into Europe, with the largest concentration in Germany, which hosts more than 500,000 displaced Syrians. Turkey cannot absorb any more migrants, neither can Europe. Erdogan's decision to open the border for millions of refugees to flood into Europe is about to make your migrant crisis a whole lot worse. Since the Syrian crisis began, we have been closely following the events, observing how they affect Europe. There are 5 factors pushing Europe to unite and form a combined military force. Brexit. Britain's veto has prevented any meaningful process towards a European military. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson made Brexit his goal. On January 31st, Parliament ratified the withdrawal agreement. Now that the United Kingdom is no longer part of the EU's political bodies or institutions, Europe is free to act as it sees fit. The military crisis. The Schengen area, comprised of 26 European nations, has removed passport requirements and other border controls, making travel quick and simple. However, these nations share a border but do not currently share any means of protecting that border. It is clear that weaknesses in the border of one state affects the whole area. Once the millions of Syrian refugees enter into one nation in the second area, they can freely travel between the other 25 nations as well. This is partially why Greece is putting up such a fight. Without a unified European military, can Greek police hold off millions of refugees alone? Terrorism. Mixed with the millions of Syrian migrants in Idlib and those seeking entrance into Europe are thousands of Al-Qaeda's linked terrorists. Recent insights on Syrian refugees reveal unique vulnerabilities, most notably exploitation by terrorists or other violent extremist organizations who can easily exploit, recruit, and mobilize downtrodden people whose countries seem indifferent to the exodus. According to EU saw in 2018, a decrease from the previous year. The EU reported 16 thwarted jihadist terrorist attacks that year, and the threat level across the EU remains high. With an influx of millions of migrants and likely thousands of terrorists, the number of attacks would logically increase, something Europe obviously doesn't want. The withdrawal of America. Because of America's security guarantees, the EU hasn't needed a military. However, America is in retreat. Tension between Russia, Turkey, and Europe has become so divisive. It's a measure of how far the United States under President Donald Trump has pulled back. America has turned inward and is slowly retreating from the world scene. Its recent deal with the Taliban was a face-saving attempt to finally withdraw its 14,000 troops from Afghanistan. President Trump even called on NATO to become more involved in the Middle East, with the end goal being America's retreat. America's withdrawal leaves behind a large power vacuum, and one nation in particular is working to fill the void. The rise of Russia. As President Trump talks about leaving Syria, Russia is looking to step up into involvement. One of the primary reasons Russia is working in Syria is to demonstrate that it is a first-rate power capable of carrying out its will outside of its borders. Russia is working to show that its military intervention is what has kept the Assad regime in control. As Russia gains more control and influence, however, fear of Russian aggression is building in Europe. The more involved Russia becomes, the more the EU feels the need to form a unified military to counter Russia. The majority of those factors are at play in the Syrian crisis. On March 3, 2020, the Turkish embassy told EU Observer newspaper that Turkey would keep allowing the Syrian refugees to migrate into Greece until the EU and the member states remember their unfulfilled commitments and show willingness to do what is necessary in addressing the root cause of the suffering in Italy. The Turkish embassy also pushed the EU to establish a safe zone in Italy where the Syrian migrants could live. Doing so would require stand-ups to Syria and to Russia as long as it supports the Assad regime. Turkey doesn't want more money to deal with the crisis. It wants European intervention and is about to get it.
Psalm 83 is a prophecy about a confederation of modern Arab nations aligned with a unified German-led European military superpower. While Europe is not there yet, we can see it being pushed into that direction.
The UK is out, America is in threat. Millions of migrants and thousands of terrorists threaten Europe's stability. Russia is on the rise and Turkey is pleading for Europe to take a stand. As the pressure intensifies and the crisis continues to worsen, watch for Europe to form a unified military and put an end to the Syrian crisis.
We have seen about the end-time signs happening in Europe, but there is more. Don't go anywhere, we will meet you after a short break. Welcome back to Science Lab. The signs are happening because Jesus is coming. We have seen about the end-time signs happening in Europe. Now let's continue. Migrants received cold shoulders from Europe. Over the period of 5 short years, Europe's attitude towards refugees has drastically changed.
And Europeans won't forget 2015. It was the time when millions of refugees from Africa and the Middle East embarked on their journey to Europe. It was the time when Chancellor Angela Merkel decided to open Germany's border, hoping that the other European countries would follow suit. The subsequent crisis, which some call a loss of control, changed Europe's political landscape dramatically.
Another refugee crisis is now looming, but rather than being welcomed by open arms, Europeans are turning their back on their new way of migrants. What has changed?
Largely due to Turkey's effort to prevent refugees from traveling to Europe, the refugee crisis has been halted in recent years. But Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has now opened his country's border for migrants to travel to Greece. In hopes of a better life, tens of thousands have taken the journey. With his decision, Erdogan has tried to force Europe to get more involved in Syria. Judging by Europe's compassionate reaction in 2015, he likely believed that the sight of thousands of refugees risking their lives to cross into the continent would move the European Union and European heads of the state to act quickly. But that's not how it played out. All agreed to not give in to Erdogan's pressure, with some having strong opinions on the matter. In an interview with NTVD, Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz claimed that Erdogan was trying to organize an attack on Europe. Journalists evoked the same imagery. Yet as video footages from the border shows, the thousands of refugees, many of whom are women and children, seems rather helpless. Turkey opens its borders, promising refugees a new home in Europe, but Greece, backed by the EU, remained closed. Police officers Greece military and barricades of barbed wire quickly ended the migrants' hopes. Frustrated refugees threw stones. Greece police fired tear gas. Europe isn't prepared to handle the crisis in a human way. The EU still lacks a common asylum police and effective protection of its external borders. Even Germany's Bundestag refused to accept 5,000 minor refugees from Greek camps. Unlike in 2015, almost all parties now shy away from German solo efforts in refugee policy. In 2015, many Europeans went the extra mile to take in refugees. Today, the situation is quite different. People have become desensitized to the suffering of the refugees and the fear that an open border policy would only further increase the popularity of Europe's far right. In 2015 and 2016, enraged Europeans set refugee centers ablaze and attacked migrants. Many refugees showed themselves ungrateful toward their new host, refusing integration, plotting terrorist attacks, forming migrant gangs, and sexually assaulting European women. European leaders evidently don't want to go through other refugee crises. But to avoid a crisis at home, the EU is risking a humanitarian crisis at its borders. Countries that closed their borders in 2015, like Hungary under Viktor Orban, was shunned at that time. Today, the policy has become the norm. The situation is similar to 2015, but the EU countries in the East are no longer on a confrontation course with Brussels. Die Welt noted on March 4th in Orban prevails. This is less because they changed their policies. It is the EU that has moved toward Hungary or Poland. The 2050 crisis enabled and strengthened the rise of various right-wing leaders throughout Europe. It changed the stance of France's President Emmanuel Macron, who recently spoke increasingly against Islam and migrant-friendly policies. The door is closed almost in unison about the new migrant crisis on the border with Greece. Europe doesn't want new flows of refugees, Die Welt wrote on March 3rd. The European heart has become very cold, the Belgian Die Standard stated. As a consequence of 2015, we have seen a handful of leaders unite against Chancellor Merkel's policies. Europe as a whole has shifted somewhat to the right. In 2020, we can expect more of the same, and perhaps even a change at the top of Germany's very own government. Today, Europeans are much more willing to accept authoritarian leaders who would take what would have previously been unacceptable measures to prevent another crisis. The Bible reveals that the mood change will enable the rise of a king of fierce countenance, Daniel 8:23. The Bible also reveals that Europe in this end time will see the rise of 10 kings who have one mind, Revelation 17. Prophecies in Daniel 11 and Psalm 83 shows that these leaders will unite with Turkey to lead various military campaigns in the Middle East, just as Turkey demands today.
But the Bible also reveals that at the head of Europe's 10 kings will be a strong leader who will go far beyond what Turkey is calling for. Another refugee crisis could further change Europe's political landscape and lead to the fulfillment of these prophecies.
All this shows that what is mentioned in the Bible that are going to take place in the end times are taking place in our lifetime. We are living in the last days and the Lord Jesus Christ is coming again very soon. Thank you for watching this episode and don't forget to tune into the Science Lab next time.
Before we end the show, we would like to ask you a question. Which country refugees are hastening the rise of European military? Option A, Syria. Option B, Somalia. Option C, Saudi Arabia.
Send us your correct answer to our email ID sciencelab@angeltv.org. If you have missed any of the episodes, don't worry, you can watch it again and again in our Science Lab YouTube page. But don't forget to like, share and comment on the video.
Ask your friends and relatives to watch the Science Lab so that they will know that we are living in the last days. Remember, the signs are happening because Jesus is coming. Maranatha.